Hello, YouTubers. Welcome to Level-Headed News. This is your host, Brenda. I have a special edition here for you. This is off of the Common Sense Show, and the URL is in the description of the video should you want to take a look at it for yourself. It is entitled, "Is America a Defeated Nation? Are there enough Americans left with the capacity to fight?" Yes, Donald Trump has been elected against all odds. However, the longest odds that Trump will face have nothing to do with political opponents. The fact of the matter is that he's inheriting an America that is damaged and disfigured beyond all recognition. The America that I know has been raped, pillaged, and plundered to the point where the nation is on life support. To push back the globalist occupation forces, Trump will need to support an affirmative contributions of good portion of the country. I am not sure that enough of the country is aware enough, emotionally intact enough, and believe that our actions can make enough difference enough to affect positive change. Time will tell on this point, but the early returns are not promising. In today's America, only 97 million Americans from a population of nearly 200 million working-age citizens actually have a full-time job. That means that every full-time worker is supporting two people in addition to themselves, and they are not our children. Trump is assuring control of a government where it's so infested with those beholding an absolute communist ideals and the dedication to living under Sharia law that this federal government has subversive influences in it from top to bottom. The country as a whole is so beat down that I'm not sure if this country has the physical capacity to rally around Trump. In psychology, we call this learned helplessness, where people become conditioned that their individual actions don't make any difference. The EBT crowd is being conditioned to depend on government as if it were their third parent. Therefore, we cannot count on 50 million Americans to push for reforms. After all, who's going to work for themselves? By many estimations, America has been in very severe decline for at least 30 years, from 1985 to 2015. Let's take a look at what's happened with salaries and wages in America. And they have a chart in this that shows what's gone on with the salaries and wages from 1985 to 2015. It says today the average American is making over $56,000 per year, but that does not include the perspective that 70% of America is making less than $30,000 a year. In 1985, Americans made just over $48,000 a year. That's a $7,000 raise in 30 years, or $250 per year. But wait a moment. We didn't figure in inflation. Please remember that the government does not count food or the price of gas in their calculations, as if we don't have to eat or drive to work. The government tells us that inflation have averaged 5% per year since World War II. When we figure the impact of inflation has on real wages, a person making $50,000 in 1985 would have to make $125,000 in 2015 to break even. And these figures are not even compounded, which they should be. However, this does not include being in a higher tax bracket as a result of trying to keep up with the inflation. I hear some economists talk about the 2020 effect, which means that as compared to 30 years ago, Americans as a whole are working for 20% less and are actually working 20% longer. No wonder why our children are snowflakes. They've had fewer examples in the home to teach them how to be tough and how to be resilient in the face of challenges. Economic indicators in this country are horrific on their face. As economist Joseph Meyer recently told my international radio audience, 75% of the country makes less than $30,000 a year. 1/3 of adults over the age of 30 are living with their parents or for economic reasons. The college loan fiasco will be the next housing crash of 2008. Over 300,000 waitresses and waiters have college degrees. Additionally, we know the following. Our nation's economy has gone from first to 14th and is rapidly plummeting. Some polling groups rank America as low as 49th behind Romania in civil liberties. Despite our 24/7, 365 access to entertainment, America ranks 14th in happiness levels. In the United States, suicide has been replaced, or try this again. In the United States, suicide has replaced car accidents as the #1 cause of death. Since 1968, suicide for Americans between the ages of 15 and 24 has skyrocketed by 310%. An estimated 20 to 25% of the country is on mind-numbing psychotropic drugs. 70% of foster children are on these drugs, which bring structural change and damage to young brains. For a few years now, we're seeing the East German Stasi-type interrogation centers being used against American citizens who are not even charged with crime, such as Chicago black sites. DHS and clergy response team have greatly compromised the spoken word of the Bible. Most churches and their pastors fall under the category of false prophets. In other words, today's American churches are centers of deception. The U.S. economy is nearly $19 trillion in debt. The U.S. government owes $240 trillion in unfunded mandated liabilities to Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, etc. The bankers have coerced governments to push their derivatives debt upon the American people. This debt amounts to $1.7 quadrillion in an annual interest rate of $505 trillion. The entire GDP of the planet is under $70 trillion. America could not pay off this debt by the 50th century. Despite spending in excess of 10 times more for health care as any other nation, we only have the 51st strongest lifespan. We live on average a full year less than a Cuban living in the third world country. Post-secondary education is the most expensive in the world, as is healthcare. Student loans represent the next type of housing bubble. The U.S., despite having only 4% of the population, has over 25% of the world's prison population. Americans are exportating in record numbers. Should you be one of them, and where would you go? In these statistics, you see how mental health and economic viability are intertwined. One measure impacts the other. The effects are bidirectional. The United States is a nation in severe decline and is beginning to show up in our mental health, which is a reflection of the troubled political and economic times that we find ourselves in. America is a severely weakened nation that may not have the capability to fight back. In 2015, over 9.3 million Americans had serious thoughts of suicide during the year. During that same year, 43.8 million adults age 18 and older experienced a diagnosable mental illness, as 2.7 million, or 1.1%, made suicide plans, and 1.3 million, or 0.6%, attempted suicide. The report by Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration also finds that 10 million adults experienced a serious mental illness, and 15.7 million adults experienced a major depressive episode in 2013. These results continued the same trend as was found in 2012, when the findings reached astronomical levels. In 2014, major depressive episodes affected approximately 1 in 10, or 2.6 million youth between the ages of 12 and 17. However, Americans do not get consistent treatment, with only 38.1% of depressed youth receive treatment for serious clinical depression. The SAMHSA report found that approximately 34.6 million adults, this represents 14.6% of all American adults, receive mental health care. These numbers are significantly escalated over the period covering 2002 to 2011, according to the new report. 47.7% of adults with any mental illness and 68.5% of adults with serious mental illness received mental health services. The number listed above are indeed grim. The rate of mental illness is growing in lockstep with our failed economy. There is definite correlation between growing rate of mental illness and our obvious failures as a country. Over 20% of Americans have diagnosable mental illness. Anywhere from 35 to 40% are receiving no treatment. This means that when the economy collapses, millions of displaced people with a significant mental illness will greatly exacerbate the coming civil unrest. There is now evidence that Americans are far more mentally ill than our foreign counterparts. According to a presentation offered at the IFPE Congress in Vienna, Austria on April the 18th, 2010 through 2014, on the results of the World Health Organization World Mental Health Survey, 19% of studied Americans experienced a clinical anxiety disorder in the previous 12-month period, which pushes the United States into a ranking of first place in this category. What do Americans have to be so nervous about? At least part of the answer, which explains why Americans have such high degree of clinical anxiety, is contained in the following paragraph, as it is undeniably stressful living in America under the present set of conditions. The United States is a nation in decline. Last year, the U.S. came in 10th place in the annual rankings of world happiness countries. This year, America has fallen to 12th. And this in a country which historically believed that the next generation would do better than their parents. That is certainly no longer the case. This marks the first time in history of the Legatum Institute's Prosperity Index that America has not placed in the top 10. These rising mental health calamities reflect the social, political, and economic attacks that we are enduring at the hands of the globalists. Interestingly, if the globalists had more time, they could simply let America waste away. However, there are enough awake Americans, maybe as many as 40 to 50 million, that they have a significant problem and must act quickly to suppress the rising tide of populism. However, if they pull a false flag attack, it might backfire on the globalists. Why? Because during the London Blitz during World War II, the rates of alcoholism and suicide actually went down. Knowing this, it will be interesting to note how the globalists proceed in collapsing the system. Can Trump rally this nation? The odds do not favor it. However, the field of sport contains many anecdotes which demonstrates how people can overcome the odds. This is why that those of us who are awake must be relentless in helping Trump, and we need some divine intervention. You need to share this on your social media so that everybody gets to hear what's going on here. Those that are awake can grasp it. Those that are not awake, maybe it'll help them. If you like what I'm doing, give it a thumbs up. Be sure and subscribe. Click that bell next to the subscribe button and check the box, and you'll get email alerts every time I do a show. And that way, you'll stay aware.